Okay, this is number 2. Just covering today some of the past few weeks' news things and a few comments on what I was going to teach today. But I'll wait and I'll probably teach that next week. But what I want to try to do is challenge us also as Christians. And on some upcoming teaching videos, you're going to see me with some of the guys from the street, and some of those were pretty good because there were some in-depth discussions about various views of just things that Christians have debated. So I don't want to say I want to be on the cutting edge. I do want to be on the cutting edge, but I want us as Christians to also begin to see whatever your view happens to be politically. And I'll give one more example, maybe a few comments on things down. The last few weeks, I've commented on Trump, I've commented on Obama in the past, and one of the things that I was not a big fan with Trump was the tweeting. I wasn't against the bombing, the Moab bombing, mother of all bombs, massive air ordnance blast. But yet, at the same time, it was kind of risky because the former president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, he came out with a very critical statement of the bomb that Trump dropped on Afghanistan a couple weeks ago now. And he said, we are not a testing ground for new weapons and so forth. Okay, so it was shaky and some of the things. The quote, standoff with North Korea, Trump said we sent an armada to the area, fleet, okay? Well now, initially the fleet went a little south. They were kind of heading south of North Korea in the Southern Pacific, but still it was going that way. So that was kind of still legitimate. Well, then the media reported it as, oh, they didn't know where they were going. The U.S. Navy under Trump didn't even know where they were. The U.S. Navy and Trump did a fake bluff. Now, once again, that's the bias in the media. They wanted to make it look like if it was successful, meaning Trump kind of stood down North Korea saying we're not going to put up with your testing of nuclear weapons anymore and so forth. But the media had to play into it and make it look negative. And I'm not saying I was a big supporter of any of these actions, but they seem like some of them did indeed work. One of the most successful things that Trump actually did in the last few years was China is the biggest ally of North Korea, okay? When China does trade with North Korea, other countries will not buy coal from North Korea and things, and North Korea is a country that's, you know, an isolated country. Well, Trump had a meeting with the leader of China, and it was actually during that meeting, he got criticized for this, but he was eating a chocolate cake, the media reported, and over the dessert with the Chinese leader, he advised the Chinese leader that they shot the Tomahawks into Syria. Okay, another thing. All right. He also successfully, this is whether you're Trump or Obama, he successfully convinced China to put more pressure on their North Korea's only real ally, which was China. China refused a shipment of coal from North Korea, and China actually seemed like, for the first time in many years, that they were going to agree to be harder on North Korea, because North Korea is under UN mandate not to test nuclear weapons and all, and they've been doing it and doing it and doing it. That was really a success, and an honest media would have simply reported, basically, though we don't like Trump, that actually is a world issue, and we do want to report that it was a little shaky for a few days. Maybe North Korea would flip and shoot a nuclear weapon into South Korea. We have a lot of troops there, and if they were nutty, they could have done that. There was a little risk that it would have been a big thing over there. It worked out, for those who like Trump, it worked out much better. For those who don't like Trump, it still worked out better. But what did the media report? Trump, before he got elected, said, I'm also going to be tough on China to have them do more about North Korea, which he did. He said, and if they don't stop their currency manipulation, I'm going to also label them as a currency manipulator, which would have been, sort of tough. But because he had the meeting with the leader of China, and the leader of China basically said, look, okay, we agree with you. We'll be tougher on North Korea. The story should have been he had a success there. What the media did, the so-called non-fake news, night after night they said, Trump has gone against his word and has let down all of his backers. And he's just, because he did not label them a currency manipulator during that meeting he had with the leader of China. Well, of course, any real analysis, any real news would have told you what I just told you. The reason he did not label them a currency manipulator, because the other item on the agenda with China was work with us with North Korea, which they did. But instead the media said, Trump is lying to the public. He told them that he'd labeled China. Finally, he had to tweet himself and say, well, of course I didn't label them a currency manipulator because we're giving them a chance to work on us on this other key policy. But all they did was report. And so even though that was a big issue, to be honest about, because it was very shaky there for a few days, the U.S. media could care less. They have an agenda. They have an agenda. Right? Now, a few comments on, I almost mentioned Michael Dowd. That's a documentary I watched the other night called The 7-5. And, I found a little thing. But it was about a corrupt cop in New York back in the 70s or 80s. Very interesting documentary. And he worked out of a precinct there in New York City. But a lot of corruption. And he was working with drug gangs and all. It was very interesting. Eventually, after 10 years on the department, they cracked down on him. He did 12 years in prison. But it was very interesting. I might mention that later. The Acts 10, which I was going to teach today, I won't do it now, but most Bible students are familiar with that. But in that chapter, there's a man by the name of Cornelius. I'll mention this part. And Cornelius is a member of the Italian band, and he's non-Jewish. Now, God's going to give a vision to Peter in this chapter to show Peter, I want to break down your barriers of those you deem as religiously correct, which was only the Jewish nation at that point. Those outside of the Jewish religion, even after the early church embraced Jesus, they still did not understand the full impact of that Jesus would break down barriers. So, he goes, I won't do the whole thing, but God reveals to Peter an interesting thing, and my Bible students are familiar with this chapter. But this man by the name of Cornelius, who the Bible says was a God-fearer, which was actually sort of those who were non-Jews, they did not fully convert to Judaism. You had Gentiles, non-Jews, who would be proselytes to Judaism. They'd fully convert. That was interesting. But then you had some Gentiles who embraced the Jewish religion in the first century, but they didn't fully convert. They are referred to as God-fearers. They kind of said, we're going to accept the commandments and the Jewish practices, but we're not going to fully convert. So Cornelius was one of these men. But an angel's going to appear to Cornelius and say, your prayers and your alms, which are good deeds to the poor, have come up as a memorial before God. Now, this man is not embracing Jesus yet, but he knows about Jesus. Because as you read the chapter, later on, Peter will go to his house. It'll be an interesting thing we'll teach it, but Peter will say, you guys know the story about Jesus. The word is all over Jerusalem and all over Judea. You know about it. So it's interesting. In that scenario, God is hearing the prayers of somebody who is worshiping God, at that moment has not embraced Jesus Christ yet, but knew about Jesus. Now, the only way to the Father is through Jesus Christ. But in this particular scenario, we have even in Scripture that God was hearing the prayers of a person who was not yet fully converted to Christianity or to Christ. And this will challenge some of we preach the gospel today as Christians. We speak truth. But we also understand that there are people who are seekers of God. And we want to bring them into the church, Christianity. But we also do not want to totally cut them off if they're God-fearers, meaning they're embracing God to the degree of their understanding where they are presently at. Because in this chapter, we read, God heard his prayers, and he was a good man. And God's going to bring him along, when I teach it next week, to the full revelation of Jesus Christ, and you understand. But for us in this step, for us to be engaged in a lot of things that are going on within the world and society, I want our mindsets also to be challenged. As we declare Jesus as the only way to the Father, we also understand that there are many things going on in the world. And many people in difficulty are praying to God. And some refugees and others, different parts of the world. God's hearing their prayers. It's up to us as the believers, as the church, to continue to bring the message of Jesus to them, but also to engage within society to see their plight. Okay, my city is Corpus Christi. If you go up a little further from here, you're going to hit Austin. You go up to Dallas, and when you talk about talk radio, and some talk radio is informative. Some is a lot of airtime that they don't cover issues. But there's a guy out of Austin. Sometimes I'll use his links, and I'm not a big fan of him. But his name is Alex Jones, and he has sort of a YouTube media empire where he does daily. He's not. I can't recommend Alex Jones because he has a lot of stuff that's just not. I could recommend it. Some of the stuff that he's most well known for predicting the 9/11 attack, calling it a false flag, but he said it right before it happened, and it was interesting. And Trump actually was on his news show. Well, Glen Beck is up in Dallas, and these guys have had a feud. Those that are familiar with the talk radio law, they've had a feud going on back and forth for a while. Of course, I mentioned O'Reilly on Fox News. You would have Sean Hannity like on a Fox, that they're kind of like in the same vein of trying to show things in a different light. But so this is somewhat of a little media wars going on in Texas between some of these groups. I think some of them play a service or a role if they speak out on issues that later, because they're speaking out on them, later gain attention. And I've seen that happen. I've seen some of the people that are critical of Rush Limbaugh or anybody on the left or right, but I've seen at times they hit on issues and it brings attention to issues. The other night I watched the documentaries I like to watch, but there's one on the executions that were taking place in Arkansas under the Republican governor. I think it's Asa Hutchinson, used to be in the Senate, but it's in Arkansas. There was a debate whether they should go through the executions, because it would be the most, like in 1 week, that Arkansas did in many years. But the reason they wanted to do them, a few more minutes, is they bought a certain drug, lethal injection drug, and it was going to expire. They had that drug there. They figured we better use it before it expires, because they won't be able to get that drug anymore. But the pharmaceutical company that sold them the drug later said, we didn't sell it to you with your understanding we were going to use it for executions. And the drug company sent them the reimbursement, gave them their money back, and said, send us the drugs back. Well, Arkansas never did. They got the money back from the purchase of that lethal drug. They figured, let's quit and do it. And then you had Johnny Depp. Some people are critical. Some people on the right are critical of Johnny Depp. Martin Sheen, the father of Charlie Sheen. These are very liberal people, but they've been activists for causes they believe in. Johnny Depp, along with Damien Echols, went to Arkansas, along with others, and protested. Some of the signs say, Jesus was killed by capital punishment. Now, this is the liberal side of the aisle, and I don't mock them either. I try to say, look, I understand their viewpoints at certain times. But Damien Echols was part of the, I think it was called the Memphis 5, or Memphis 3 or something, but these were some boys that were sent to death row for the murder of a young child in Arkansas many years ago. But yet, during their time in prison and on death row, serious questions arose. I watched the documentary. So Johnny Depp, the famous actor, helped Damien Echols to finally gain his freedom. But as you watch the documentary, there were indeed questions whether or not these boys committed that crime. And eventually they were released. On death row. But Damien Echols was on the news, a liberal news, and he said, when the evidence came out, he was talking about why he went to protest the execution of these men in Arkansas. He said, when the evidence came out of our innocence, he said, most people think that within the prison system, especially death row, he said, most people would think that, of course, they would stop the execution. He said, that's not how it works. He says, even if evidence comes out, especially in death row case, he says, the system still moves ahead. And people within it might have knowledge that, wait a minute, but they just keep moving ahead. He said, unless it gets public exposure, whether media, you go, he said, you still have to work at, not executing the person. I found that just interesting, because in cases where stuff like that is true, whether you are on the left or the right, you never should support injustice, whether it's in our society or injustice in the world. And the reason you heard me on the first video upset was because the viewpoint of that liberal FM radio news was they felt like it was good for them to mock the lady that's running for president in France, though she herself has taken a stand to defend the oppressed women who live under Sharia law. So the woman's political stand is, we want the freedom of women living under oppressive Islamic rule. But yet the media made that woman look like she was anti-woman and bigoted, because her other views are on a conservative side of the aisle. So none of that is true. That whole narrative is fake news. And fake news, the obvious fake news, we could all pretty much see, okay? Some of the InfoWars, Alex Jones, yes. Sometimes you get it from a Glen Beck. But it's the false narrative that you don't see, when they just don't truly explain. It should have been reported as the the media should have reported the Donald Trump meeting with the leader of China as, believe it or not, it was successful. Because China, for the first time in a very long time, actually decided to go hard on North Korea, their ally. But no, it was reported how Trump went against his word on the currency. So this is, and to me, there are important things for us as Christians to see, especially in these areas of where we're overlooking things that are wrong within our country or in society as a whole. So I made a few comments on that. I'll probably do at least one more. And if there's any news that comes up, before the next one, hopefully I'll cover that. Okay? This is number 2.